Welcome to your personalized deep dive. We're going to be looking closely at the report you sent over, a survey of over 10,000 Polish academics. That's a massive sample size, and they cover lots of different fields, career stages, all sorts of things. And what really jumped out at us is how differently various groups, especially by age and gender, view success.
It's fascinating, isn't it? We're getting a glimpse into what Polish academia really values, what the pressures are, and what people are dedicating their careers to.
Yeah.
As we go through this data, think about how it compares with your own experience in research.
Exactly. And let's jump right in with a deceptively simple question. What is science, anyway? One of the things that surprised me was that over 15% of those academics surveyed didn't always agree that producing original research is the core of what science is all about.
It is interesting, and it gets even more nuanced if we dig into the specifics. We see 85% strongly agreeing that original research is core, but then only 60% say applying that knowledge to real-world problems is essential.
Whoa, that's a pretty big gap. Makes you wonder, right? Is that a practical matter, or does it reflect something deeper about how different fields approach knowledge itself?
Yeah, and it varies a lot between the fields. Like if you compare humanities scholars, 72% of them prioritize original research. But then only 51% of engineers feel the same way.
Interesting.
Makes you think, doesn't it? Maybe it's because engineers are often working directly with industry partners or trying to solve specific problems.
Yeah, they're hands-on. And speaking of the practical side of things, it seems like funding pressures are a big deal in this report. A huge 82% of these Polish academics feel the heat to bring in that external funding.
I'm sure that's something most researchers can relate to, no matter where they are. The interesting part is how it plays out differently in various disciplines. Like in agriculture, 73% report feeling that pressure strongly, way more than other fields.
That's a big difference. Why do you think that is?
Well, I mean, agricultural research, it's often tied to some really vital stuff. National food security, economic development, even climate change solutions. It gets a lot of attention from governments and private companies, so naturally the competition for grants is fierce.
So it's not just the field itself, but how it connects to bigger needs and funding priorities. Right. It's a really good point. All right, let's move on to something everyone's talking about these days. Interdisciplinarity. Is it just a buzzword, or are researchers really feeling the pressure to work across those disciplinary lines?
Well, the data shows a pretty interesting split here. Like about a third of the Polish academics we're looking at feel the push towards interdisciplinary work. Another third disagree, and then the rest are somewhere in between.
So pretty much evenly divided then. What really stands out to me, though, is the difference between specific fields. You've got medical researchers, like a full 37% of them feel that pressure toward interdisciplinarity. Then on the other hand, only 9% of social scientists feel strongly about it.
Yeah, it really highlights how differently disciplines define their boundaries and how they approach collaborating too. Like by nature, medical research already draws on all sorts of fields, biology, chemistry, clinical practice. So it's pretty interdisciplinary right from the start, But social sciences, they might have a stronger tradition of working within their own, I guess you could say, lanes.
Yeah, and maybe some social scientists are just hesitant to jump on that interdisciplinarity train without really seeing the benefits, Like, is it leading to better research or just ticking a box on a grant application?
Yeah, that's a valid point for sure. And that kind of skepticism leads us to another interesting area the report highlights, the whole balance between applied and basic research.
Right. Less than 25% of these academics are feeling that strong pressure to do applied work. But again, we see a big difference, especially if we're comparing humanities scholars with, let's say, engineers or agricultural researchers.
It's not too surprising, is it? I mean, the humanities tend to focus on big, fundamental questions, while engineers and agricultural researchers are, as we were just saying, often engaged in work with direct, practical applications. And that difference, it probably loops back to funding and priorities too, doesn't it?
It definitely does. If your field is primarily funded by grants that need to show tangible results, then that pressure to do applied research is going to be there. It's almost like a matter of survival at that point, not just a philosophical choice. So we're seeing this complex interplay of factors shaping research priorities. You've got funding models, societal needs, those disciplinary boundaries, and I'm sure a whole lot of individual passion mixed in there too.
Absolutely. And it's interesting because in the midst of all these pressures, one finding really stuck out to me as positive. 83% of the Polish academics in this survey feel that their work is ethically sound.
Yeah, that is good to hear. Almost like a collective sigh of relief, But The report doesn't shy away from some of the tougher stuff either. They point out what they call the success trap, this idea of putting way too much emphasis on things like the number of publications, citations, those kinds of metrics. And they argue that it creates this distorted picture of what real success in academia actually is.
Yeah, that's a really important point. This success trap, as they put it, it raises some serious concerns about how that focus on metrics can actually end up harming the quality of the research itself.
Right. Instead of chasing groundbreaking discoveries, even if it's on a less popular topic, researchers might feel pressured to publish in big-name journals just to boost their numbers.
It's like they're playing this high-stakes game with a very specific set of rules, but those rules might not always lead to the best outcomes for science as a whole.
Exactly. And on top of these external pressures, we see this interesting generational divide in how Polish academics define success. Younger academics, those under 40, are much more likely to say that international publications are the key. Like 65% of them think it's crucial. Older academics, though, they tend to prioritize getting a full professorship. 42% of them see that as the top marker of success.
Do you think it's just a matter of shifting priorities as you move through your career? Or is it something more than that?
I think it's a bit of both. We have to consider how much academia itself has changed over the past few decades. Globalization, those international rankings, the emphasis on collaborations, it's created this environment that's much more competitive, much more interconnected than before.
So it's like the younger generation is coming in with a totally different set of expectations and goals. Exactly. For them, navigating this global system is essential. Publishing in those international journals, it's not just about personal ambition anymore. It's about proving the quality of your research to a global audience. And that's crucial for getting grants, attracting collaborators, building your reputation internationally.
It's like they're building their careers on a global stage right from the start.
Exactly. And this has influenced the kinds of research that get attention and rewards. There's a growing emphasis on that cutting-edge, high-impact research, the kind that addresses global challenges.
Makes sense why those younger academics are aiming for those top journals. It's their way to join that global conversation.
But it does raise some questions, doesn't it? Like, is this focus on international recognition coming at the expense of local or regional research needs? Are researchers feeling pressured to work on the hot topics, even if they aren't that relevant to the Polish context?
Yeah, it's a tricky balance, isn't it? Engaging with the global research community while also being relevant to your own country.
And that's where the perspective of those senior academics comes in. They've seen these changes happening, and they can offer some really valuable insights. For them, reaching that full professorship, it might represent more than just a personal achievement. It could be a commitment to nurturing the next generation of Polish scholars, contributing to their nation's intellectual and cultural life.
It's about building a legacy that goes beyond publications and metrics.
Right, and that dialogue between generations, it's so important. It's about recognizing the value of international recognition, yes, but also local relevance, cutting-edge research, but also the foundations that support it.
Creating a research culture that supports individual ambitions, but also that sense of shared responsibility. A culture where different paths to success are valued and recognized.
Absolutely. And the report doesn't stop there. It goes on to highlight some really interesting differences in how men and women perceive success in Polish academia.
Yeah, that's a big one. It brings up some important questions about how we're evaluating and rewarding academic contributions, and whether those systems might actually be biased against certain groups.
Like, for example, the data shows that women are less likely to agree with this idea of concentrating funding on the quote-unquote most productive researchers. They're also more likely to be concerned about how the pressure to publish can actually hurt the quality of research.
It's complex, for sure. But it does suggest that we need to take a closer look at how women's work is being judged, and whether there are systemic biases at play.
It's definitely something that needs further investigation, for sure. We can't say for certain what's causing these differences based on this one report, but it definitely points to a need for more research.
Right, and perhaps even a reassessment of how we're defining and rewarding success in academia as a whole.
Absolutely. And that's something we can all think about no matter what field we're in.
So this deep dive has already shown us so much about what's going on in Polish academia, the pressures, the priorities, the philosophical divides, all of it. And we've only scratched the surface. We'll be back in part 2 to dive into international collaboration, mobility, and even the languages of research. But for now, let's pause here and let all of this sink in.
Yeah, take some time to think about how these findings resonate with your own experience. What are your priorities? What does success mean to you? It's something to consider as we continue exploring this fascinating world of Polish academia.
Welcome back to our deep dive into Polish academia. Last time we talked about how those researchers define success, the pressures they face, their views on ethics, things like that. Now let's look at something else that's super important in research these days. International collaboration and how researchers move around between countries.
Yeah, those are big themes throughout this whole report, and they really give us a glimpse into how Polish academics see themselves in that global research world.
We did touch on international publications earlier, but what about other kinds of international involvement? Like, does having those strong global connections influence how Polish academics see their own achievements?
Oh, absolutely. The data actually shows a pretty clear connection there. Academics who have a lot of international collaborators, they tend to care more about things like citations, being affiliated with prestigious institutions, and getting research grants. And this is even stronger among academics who have spent a lot of time working in research institutions in other countries.
It's like that experience abroad changes your view of what a successful academic career looks like. But why is that? Is it just about chasing prestige?
I don't think so. Think about what it means to be in a totally different research environment. When you work abroad, you're exposed to all these different research cultures, funding models, even ways of thinking about how knowledge is created. It can really broaden your perspective and influence how you measure your own success.
That makes sense.
Like you might start to see the value in publishing in those high-impact journals that reach a global audience. Or maybe you're more interested in collaborating with people from those big-name institutions.
It's almost like you get a deeper understanding of that global research scene and all the different ways you can make a contribution.
Exactly. And of course, having that international experience often makes it easier to get those competitive grants, which everyone sees as a sign of success.
It's like a combination of things, getting that international recognition, growing your network, and opening doors to more funding. But what about researchers who haven't had the chance to go abroad? Are they automatically at a disadvantage?
Not necessarily. International experience is definitely valuable, but it's not the only way to have a fulfilling and impactful career. The report really emphasizes that individual motivation is key. Different approaches to research have their own value.
That's good to hear. So it's not just about checking boxes on your CV, but about finding the research that you're passionate about, the research that aligns with your goals.
Right. The report actually looks at what motivates Polish academics, and it found something really interesting. Researchers who are driven by, wanting to boost their scientific reputation, they tend to care more about those international collaborations and publications.
So there's a connection between wanting that international recognition and wanting to make a name for yourself in the global research community.
But we have to remember that this focus on building your reputation can sometimes lead people down a path where metrics become more important than substance. Like the pressure to publish in those big journals can sometimes overshadow the pursuit of truly original and impactful research.
It's that success trap we talked about earlier,
Exactly.
where the metrics themselves become the goal rather than a way to achieve something bigger.
But there's also a really encouraging finding. Intrinsic motivation, that real passion for discovery, is still a huge predictor of success, regardless of whether you've worked abroad or not.
So it's about that genuine love of research, that desire to solve problems.
That's what keeps people going through all the challenges and setbacks of a research career.
It reminds us that success in academia isn't a one-size-fits-all thing. It's about finding your own path, driven by your passion and a desire to make a real difference.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And this brings us to another interesting part of the report. The languages of research. It might surprise you to learn that the language you do your research in can actually influence how you define success.
Oh, wow. I wouldn't have expected that. How does that work?
Well, the data suggests that academics who mainly do their research in English, they see international collaborations and publications as more important for success. Which makes sense, right? Publishing in English gives you a wider audience and makes it more likely that other researchers will cite your work.
If you want to play on that global stage, you need to speak the language, literally.
Exactly. But researchers who mainly publish in Polish, they often focus on different things, like national awards or recognition within the Polish academic community. They might also be more interested in contributing to their specific field within Poland.
It's fascinating how language can shape not just how we talk about research, but also how we see its impact and value.
It shows just how diverse academia is and all the different ways researchers can contribute to knowledge. And it raises a really important question. Is the dominance of English in science creating barriers for researchers who work in other languages?
That's a really good point. Are we missing out on valuable research and perspectives because of language barriers?
It's definitely something to think about. The report suggests that we need more linguistic diversity in academia, more opportunities for researchers who work in different languages to share their work and collaborate internationally.
This deep dive is painting such a complex picture of what it's like to be an academic in Poland. We've seen how international experience, personal motivations, and even language can shape how researchers define success.
As we move into the final part of our discussion, it's important to remember that success in academia isn't just one thing. It's multifaceted, it's constantly evolving, and it's influenced by so many different personal, social, and institutional factors.
Welcome back. It's amazing how much we've already unpacked just from this one survey of Polish academics.
I know, right? It's really given us a feel for the people behind the research, their passions, their struggles, all of it.
Yeah, you see the human side of things, not just the numbers. And one thing that's really stuck with me is that generational divide we keep talking about. How Polish academics from different age groups define success, it's really fascinating, and I think it deserves a little more attention.
You're right. It's more than just a statistic. It speaks to some really big changes happening within academia, those pressures facing different generations of researchers. It's all connected.
Right, like we were saying, those younger academics, they're all about those international publications. But the older generation, they're more focused on becoming full professors. You could say it's just a natural progression, as you move up the ladder, your priorities change, but I think there's more to it than that.
I think so too. Academia has changed so much, even just in the last few decades. Globalization, the rise of those international rankings, the focus on collaborations. It's all created this much more competitive, much more interconnected research environment.
It's like the rules of the game have changed, and those younger academics are coming in already knowing that.
Exactly. They have to learn to navigate this globalized system if they want to get ahead. Publishing in those top international journals, it's not just about personal ambition anymore. It's proof that your research is high quality, it shows you're visible on the world stage, and that's what you need to get grants, find collaborators, build your reputation internationally.
So it's not enough to just follow your passion, you also have to play the game, so to speak.
Right, and this shift toward internationalization has even influenced the kinds of research that are considered valuable. There's this huge emphasis now on cutting-edge research, the kind that addresses global challenges or pushes the boundaries of knowledge.
Which makes sense why those younger Polish academics are so focused on getting into those top-tier journals. They have to be part of that global conversation.
But it does make you wonder, doesn't it? Is all this emphasis on international recognition taking away from more local research priorities? Are researchers feeling pressured to work on the hot topics, even if they're not that relevant to Poland itself?
Yeah, it's a tough balance to strike.
It is, and that's where the perspective of those senior academics, those who have seen these changes happen, becomes really valuable. For them, becoming a full professor, it's not just a personal accomplishment. It can be a way to support the next generation of Polish scholars to contribute to their country's intellectual life.
It's about leaving a legacy that goes beyond just your own work.
Exactly. And that dialogue between generations, it's so important. Recognizing that both international recognition and local relevance are important. Cutting-edge research, Andy, that foundational work, it all matters.
It's about creating a research culture that supports individual ambition, but also that sense of responsibility to your community.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
Well, this has been a truly fascinating deep dive. We've explored so much about Polish academia, the pressures, the priorities, the motivations. We've even touched on some pretty big philosophical questions.
And we've only just scratched the surface.
But for now, it's time to wrap things up.
Keep thinking about those big questions. Keep pushing those boundaries.
Thanks for joining us on this journey into the world of Polish academia. Keep diving deep.